participants in the meeting. If you look on the bottom of your screen, you will see a thing that says participants, and you can click that and you'll get a small side panel that'll show you that there are 36 attendees and 12 panelists, which we are of the panelist variety. Chris, can you give us a heads up as to when we would be ready to begin recording and open the meeting? We're just kind of getting, I don't think we have a quorum. I have 12 panelists, but I'm not sure that we are actually a quorum yet.
Okay, I'll let you know.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I see 6 members. No, 7 with me. So we're one shy, I think. One.
How do I get a picture in there?
You undo your stop. You have video in the lower left. You click your little video thing.
Share video.
You're in there. I don't know I'm not a Zoom.
Start my video. Oh, okay.
There she is.
Thank you.
All right. So I think we might have a quorum. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have a quorum. Okay. All right. So Chris, I think we're ready. Recording is paused. You can start us up if you want. There we go. Okay. I'm going to call a public hearing of the Finance Committee to order, and note that we are being recorded. At the moment, we have a quorum. We have a number of attendees. Right now, there are 32 attendees, and we're opening the public hearing. So the beginning of our agenda this evening is a few comments from the moderator, which we would like to invite to, but I don't see the moderator in our list. So we have to wait.
Sorry, give me a minute.
Yep. There she is.
Good evening.
So, Madam Moderator, I've introduced you into the meeting and opened the floor to you for a few comments regarding this year's town meeting and where we are with it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think everybody knows that town meeting was recessed and continued first to May 30th, and we fully expect that it will be recessed and continued again to June 22nd. We're currently operating as if we're going to have a town meeting on June 22nd, but we don't actually know that given the uncertainties of the pandemic situation. And if we do have a town meeting, it's not going to look like our usual town meeting, and we are in discussion now about exactly what type of measures we should be taking to protect public health if we have a town meeting. If we do have an alternative to having a town meeting, if we can't do it by June 30th, then we are able to continue into the fiscal year on 1/12 of last year's budget on a monthly basis. And I know that Carrie and her staff, along with Stephen Crane and his staff, have been working on developing information about what the economic impact of doing that would be so that we understand exactly what kind of an alternative that is to holding a town meeting on June 22nd. If the public health situation is such that it dictates clearly against holding a public meeting like a town meeting on June 22nd, then we'll simply not do it, regardless of how costly or inconvenient the alternative that we have of proceeding at 1/12 is. But if we are, as I suspect we will be, in a gray area where we're making judgment calls about whether having a town meeting is worth the risk to public health, and if so, how do we do it? And do we do the whole meeting, or do we have a set of warrant articles that we move to postpone indefinitely to a special town meeting in the fall and act only perhaps on the immediate operating budgets for the town and the schools. So we're still in a bit of flux, and I think everyone's received the memo that I've done on various options that are under consideration in the 300 odd towns with open town meetings in Massachusetts that are wrestling with the same issues that we're wrestling with. But I want everybody to know that we're on it. We're thinking through the costs and the benefits here, and staying abreast of all of the daily changing information, and we'll be making the most protective and best decisions for Concord that we can. So thank you all, and thank you all for having this hearing in this unusual mode. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Okay. Our first order of business this evening is to discuss the Article 44 Community Preservation Committee appropriation recommendations. And for that, we have Chair Kratzley. Mr. Kratzley, would you like to step up to the virtual microphone?
Well, here I am. Okay, so I was just going to make the introduction. I'm John Kratzley, 10 Edmonds Road. And with us this evening is my Vice Chair, Tom Kearns, Heather Gill, our Senior Planner, who has just put the slides up, which I appreciate. CPC members are in the audience with you, and applicants are with you, as well as Mina Macarius, Town Council. There are some, Heather, if you want to go ahead, that's slide number 1. And can we, so Article 44 has a recommendation of 1.9 million for the CPC distribution. There are 10 recommended funding grants in the warrant article. I will, I think in a hopefully speedy way, go through them for you. 6 are for town projects, 4 are for community projects, 1.6 million are town projects, about 300,000 are community projects. Next slide. I think this is all familiar to FinCom members. We're a town of a 1.5% surcharge. The amount of money that is available, how we get to the 1.9 is a combination of our local surcharge and state match money from the Registry of Deeds. I think the next slide simply shows our distribution plan for this year between the statutorily required areas, community housing, recreation, historic preservation, and open space. So I think I'd like to go to slide 6 if I could, and we'll pass the and move to slide 6. Because of the interest in 2 particular proposed grants, and to accommodate town council's schedule, I'd like to start with the applications that had the most questions at our February 6th meeting. And these are the proposed grants for historic preservation for 2 religious organizations, First Parish in Concord and the Holy Family Parish. And I think we should just show slide 7 as well, which is the summary of the Holy Family Rectory renovation as well. When we met on February 6th, I handed out to all of you individually, because we could be together at that time, town council's opinion letters approving eligibility of each project for CPC funding and stating that in his opinion, each of these 2 projects could survive a Kaplan or so-called Acton court challenge. Each proposed project is for historic preservation, and that's exactly as the CPC saw it. The First Parish funds would repair and restore the clock tower or belfry that holds the town-owned clock, as well as the dome above it and the necessary work on the 4 clock faces. The Holy Family Parish funds would replace an old roof on the rectory house and do so with new historically accurate matching materials. Each of the proposed funds is in the exact same number of 75,000. And at this point, I would turn to Town Council for your questions of him regarding the opinions that he offered or his own comments. Mina, I don't know if you have something to say right at the start or would rather take a question or two about these two, but certainly back in February, these attracted the most attention.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for accommodating my schedule and starting with these. I have very little to add in addition to what we said in that memorandum that you received back in February. We've looked at both the Holy Family Parish and the clock tower projects.
Mina, could I interrupt you for just one second? In this context, you're speaking to the community. You did speak to us as a finance committee and we did have those memos from you, but the community needs to hear in a separate vein. So so don't presume that folks have heard or seen or read these memos. It would be better that way, I think.
Okay, no, that's fine. I want to limit saying too much in the interest of time, but sure, I can quickly summarize the issue. So the issue with both these projects is that they are funding private projects, which is certainly allowed under the Community Preservation Act. Lots of private projects have been funded in the past. What makes these of interest and why we were asked to look at them separately is that both of the owners of the projects are religious institutions. A few years back, the town of Acton funded a project in its historic district, which was a church, and the grant of funds was challenged by a group of taxpayers alleging, among other things, that the funding from the CPA, the Community Preservation Act funding, violated the anti-aid amendment of the Massachusetts Constitution, which is intended to limit the use of public funds for private organizations, in particular, private religious organizations. The anti-aid amendment has a long history. It has its roots partially in the anti-establishment clause of the U.S. Constitution, but also in some anti-Catholic school funding in the 1800s. So that's sort of the idea of it, is to avoid entanglement of religious uses with public funding. We happen to represent the town of Acton, so I am very familiar with the case because my partner, Nina Pickering Cook, tried the case. And the Supreme Judicial Court came up with the decision on it, essentially kicking back parts of the factual findings to the town and setting a test for when projects are eligible for funding and when they're not. And so taking that test into account with the Holy Family Parish and the First Church projects here, we analyzed those back in the fall and December as we look at every CPA project, but those two had the most questions. And in both cases, we came out of the opinion that we believe both projects are eligible for funding, although certainly want anyone in the community and the finance committee to be aware that the test set out by the Kaplan case, the Acton case, is a fact-based one, which makes it susceptible to somebody taking a challenge of the case. We believe the town has the better of that argument, but I can't rule out that somebody would challenge either grant of funding. Just taking them separately, and I want to very quickly just mention the Kaplan test, without turning this into a law school lecture, which I'm sure no one would want, is three factors. First, whether the purpose of the challenged funding is to aid private causes, in this case is churches, whether it does in fact substantially aid those churches, and finally, whether this whether the aid avoids the political and economic abuses which prompted passage of the anti-aid amendment. So as you can already imagine, those are very flexible standards. But taking each of those in turn, and starting with First Church, which we think is the easier one, certainly in both cases, the use of CPA funds is not to aid churches or to aid religious organizations, it's to aid historic buildings. And the SJC recognized that in the Kaplan case. I think it's very clear the use of that funding here for First Parish, which is really a town-owned clock that happens to be in a church. This is not uncommon. There are actually several towns in Massachusetts that have this feature. I know, for instance, Winchester placed its clock in the church tower, and at the time, those were the tallest buildings in town, and where town clocks often went was churches. So there's certainly no purpose to aid it there. With respect to Holy Family, that factor, I think, also comes out in favor of the funding being eligible. The funding would be used here entirely to repair a historic roof, I believe, and Mr. Kratzley and others can correct me if I have the project off slightly, but that's it's not intended to preserve or aid any of the religious aspects of it, of the building. Two, whether the aid here would substantially aid the churches. Again, with the clock tower, it's the easier of the two because it's a town-owned resource and it would be going to preserve that particular resource. We originally had questions in October in our first memorandum to the CPC whether or not to get a little bit more detail about Holy Family. But the information we got back, again, made it clear that the cost would only be going for historic preservation. One of the things that SJC was worried about in Kaplan was a sort of supplanting of funds. Would it end up making it easier for the church to spend money on operational things or sort of other pieces of it? And then the third factor in both of these is sort of the entanglement of church and state. And that factor was the hardest one for the SJC to deal with in Acton, partly because some of the historic features of the church in Acton included a stained glass window with certain religious significance to it. That's not at issue here. The two things being repaired are, again, the clock, which has functioned as a town clock for well over a century, and the rectory, which, although certainly in a roundabout way serves a religious purpose, the reason for the funding here is for the historic nature of it and doesn't have any particular religious features. The closest that it comes, I believe there may be two small crosses on some of the doors, but it is unlike a stained glass, which the SJC, to paraphrase, said it's really hard to say when stained glass is just a beautiful architectural feature versus a religious feature. It's so enmeshed within religious iconography and imagery. And that's really the test. The other thing I would just keep in mind, and the SJC grappled with this as well, it's a little bit different in the CPC is a somewhat discretionary grant program, obviously, and the Community Preservation Committee makes recommendations both about the eligibility of funds for use, but also the best use of limited funds among a lot of projects and a lot of requests. Around the same time that the SJC was grappling with the Acton case, the U.S. Supreme Court was deciding a case called Trinity Lutheran out of Missouri. And one of the key findings in that case is that while state and local governments certainly are entitled to be careful about Establishment Clause issues and that entanglement of church and state, they also have to be careful not to treat otherwise non-religious aspects of funding requests from religious organizations differently. And so in that case, it was a playground funding program the state of Missouri had set up. The particular church in question had a playground and it wanted to apply for that funding. And the state government entities got squeamish about funding a church playground. The Supreme Court ruled in the church's favor that they shouldn't be disqualified simply for the playground being owned by a church. And the reason that's relevant here is that it really helps put a finer point on the sort of the funding purpose issue. In Trinity Lutheran, the point is what was being funded was a playground that happened to be owned by a church. In your case, and why I think both of these are eligible for CPA funding, is that you have a clock tower and a historic building downtown, both of which, or excuse me, a historic building in Concord, that both of which are being funded because of their historic nature, not because they are religious. And the fact that they're owned by religious entities perhaps warrants some caution on the other factors in the Kaplan test, but not an outright disqualification. So that's it. So, yeah.
So can I ask you a question, please? Mr. Kratzley used the phrase withstand a challenge. These projects could withstand a challenge. So I'm not a lawyer. Does that mean they would win a lawsuit?
That's right. That's a good way to say that I believe if someone brought a lawsuit, the town decided to defend it on the grounds that it was a constitutional use of funds, that the town would prevail.
So my recollection from our last meeting was it was this committee's intent to avoid opening up the town to the possibility of a lawsuit. I may not remember. It was a while ago. I may not recall exactly.
John, I believe your recollection is you're on point there, but I do think that we didn't make any particular decision. It was definitely discussed that we would be concerned that we're opening ourselves up and that might be a reason to decide against. But I don't think that we had any particular, we didn't take a vote or have a finding, I don't believe. I'd like to ask a question, Amina, that's a little bit off the, it's not really diving into the religious aspect of this, but, we've tapped up against this issue in the past, and that is the funding of exterior characteristics of historic properties, which are not inherently public access facilities. The Wright Tavern was funded multiple years in a row for exterior characteristics, windows, roofing, etc. The Masonic Lodge had foundation work done, etc. The building in question that I'm questioning is the Rectory. It's a religious facility, and I just don't know how open the facility is to the general, we'll call the general public or non-religious purpose. So that's just a question that's a little bit outside of whether it's a religious funding or not, and more, is it a private entity that doesn't have a public component to it that's truly public? That's my question.
Sure. So, Mr. Banfield, you can tell me if this is going to the heart of what you're asking, but really the question is, any private entity where the funding is for the exterior of the building and it's not necessarily going to be used by the public, the building itself, whether that's an appropriate use of CPA funds. And I guess my answer to that is there's sort of two-part. There is a policy piece, and whether you decide whether the CPC decides to recommend it and town meeting ultimately votes it, maybe that comes into the balance. But from the legal side, which is what I'm limited to, it's certainly a legal use of Community Preservation Act funds. And the reason there is that the Community Preservation Act is intended to do exactly what it sounds like, preserve certain assets, some of which, like recreational areas and affordable housing, for instance, can be used and are intended to be used by either particular individuals for community housing or the public as a whole for recreation. Some of which are just intended to be preserved because of the value of them and the recognition from the legislators they might otherwise be lost. And when it comes to historic preservation, the idea is to preserve historic structures. The analog is conservation land, which CPA funds CPA funds and now the charitable exemption in the property tax code both recognize that conservation land may be sort of untouched. It's not necessarily for use by the public, it's for the value of having it there. The same can be said for historic preservation. The difference is when you can actually see the historic facade, it makes a difference for the community as a whole to be able to see it from the outside. I would add to that, just to be clear, because I don't want to be misunderstood as saying that the rectory is not open for public use. In fact, one of the factors that I think is helping avoid some of the religious use issues with the Holy Family Rectory is that they do in fact make it open for use by a variety of groups, not solely church groups. And so I guess the short answer, Mr. Banfield, is as long as a historic preservation is preserving a recognized historic resource, it's not relevant that it might not be open to all of the public, especially when you're talking about historical facades. And if the money was being used for the interior, I would agree with you.
I'm sort of okay with that to a point. I'd like to see the public access be non-discriminatory, and I have some concerns about the Catholic Church having their own agenda. But that's one item. But the other item that I am concerned about is that by stretching this, we have a lovely drive down Lexington Road, and there are numerous homes which are privately held, which contribute to the historic nature of that road. Not the least of which is the Grapevine Cottage, in which the Concord grape was first created, or not created, but found. Can these private individuals petition legitimately for this money? Are we setting ourselves on a path that means that we have a very broad view of what a public facade or historic preservation would be?
Dean, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond on the question of the Holy Family public use, because I'm looking at the supplemental application that town council referred to. And there's a list at the bottom of the first page of about 6 or 7 different organizations that utilize the space in that building, as well as a reference that when after the roof is done with other non-CPC money, there will be enhanced space for more public meetings and more public groups in that building, because they do contemplate a bigger project, although the roof funding is the only issue they came to CPC for. And with respect to, I just one more thing.
And to say that here's a list of public entities that are not of a religious nature that we have in our facility. I don't want to get too divisive, but there would be some entities where they would just say, no, we don't agree with that. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I wanted to respond to John Hinckley as well on the issue of the risk of litigation or the fear of litigation. And because I did hear that mentioned at the February 6th meeting. And I want to make clear that the CPC view is that these are worthwhile historic preservation projects that went through a very thorough review, site visits, applicant interviews, public hearings, town council, several town council opinion letters, and a final vote. So it's our view that the fear of litigation or the risk of litigation is really not a right or legitimate test going forward even for you folks. I know you have a long-term responsibility for the town budget and the town litigation budget, and I know there are litigations in process that are on people's minds right now. But we would ask that this work, very carefully done, go forward to town meeting on the merits. Thanks.
Can I ask?
I just have go ahead.
Who's going?
Mary, how about Mary?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So, John, if in fact someone did mount a case against this. I know that we feel that we would prevail, but we would still incur legal expenses. So can you tell me, would those legal expenses be paid by the town, or would they come out of the CPC funding?
I assume now Nina may have a more historically consistent answer, but I would assume they would be out of the town litigation budget, because the CPC funding has already been allocated. Should the warrant prevail and go through town meeting as brought to you this evening, that money would all be appropriated to the 10 different applicants. There's a small amount in item number 10 for administration, and we could debate down the road whether some of that money could be
No,
used for.
I understand. No, I'm more interested in will the CPC eventually get cross-charged for the exposure to the fact that we might have to pay to defend these decisions? That's my question.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any other town agency or town board that ever has
Okay.
had to carry its own litigation costs.
Carrie, do you know if do we cross-charge at all, or?
We do in limited circumstances.
Okay.
Any other questions from the Finance Committee regarding, well, we've only looked at 2 of the slate of CPC things. Carl, you have your hand up.
Well, yeah, it's not a legal question, it's an architectural question. A few years ago, when the slate roof on the brick building was going to be replaced, and they sought that was the town building, sought a CPC grant, and they were refused. And the expected outcome, I'm not sure what the actual outcome, I would have to go back and check, but was that the slate roof then would not be replaced and they would be using asphalt shingles. Now, these Ludovici tiles are a premium roof, very, very nice roof. But is there a chance that if they don't get funded, they would replace them with, asphalt shingles?
I am not aware whether the applicant is on this Zoom with us to answer that question. I know that when they revised their application, as you heard from town council, they were very specific about the desired historically accurate tiles, and they limited their application to exactly that approach for their roof.
Mr. Chair, if I could,
Yeah, Heather may have an answer on this.
Yeah, they're also located within the historic district. So they currently have a certificate of appropriateness from the Historic Districts Commission to replace the roof in kind, which is the existing material on the roof. So if they were to replace it with any other sort of material, they would need to submit an application to the Historic Districts Commission, and it would be up to them what type of material they would approve.
Dee.
Yeah, a couple comments and then a question. Carl, I remember that case coming before the CPC when I was on the CPC, and it was the cost difference between a slate roof and the asphalt on a Kaiser Road building was just very, very high. And so that was part of the discussion. In terms of a religious or a religious structure, anybody at town meeting can suggest or make a motion to eliminate a project from the list of projects. So that's out there. As long as you have a second, you can vote on it at town meeting. So that's the other comment. My question, John, to you is, can you please refresh my memory on what percentage did you use for your state match? Or maybe Heather knows.
I bet Heather knows the answer.
Not off the top of my head. I can check.
Okay, because I know that originally it had gone up. What the thought was in the late winter was that it was going to be about 19%. But there was an email that was sent out that I received today from the CPA that said that based on what has happened with the taxes and tax collections and the deeds, where the money comes, when the revenue comes for the use of the CPA, that they are now saying that the state match is 11.2%.
I believe that's for next year.
It's for next year. All that whole
Isn't that what we're talking about?
No, like the funding we would have available to allocate for next year's applications.
For 22.
For next year's application.
Correct.
Okay. I do think it would be good if you checked on that.
Yeah, I
Just to
believe
make
John
sure.
sent the email
I asked
today.
that question.
I was just surprised that this would come out today if it didn't have some impact in terms of the funding for this, for what people are looking at for voting on for next year's budget.
Dee, right after I saw this same memo that you're referring to, I sent an email asking that same question. But I read this to refer to next year when the Department of Revenue formula has been completely changed by the legislature.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're all set. We don't have any issue with whatever state match percent you use.
We do not believe so. From
Okay.
everything we've been able to learn.
Great. Thank you, John and Heather.
Do we have any more questions on the first two items? Oh, Andrea, what would you like to say?
I just have a question about the groups that you listed, or there is a list of groups that use the facility. And I assume there's a charge for the rental by each of the groups. And is there a portion of that rental, if it is rented, that would go towards any part of this project? Does anybody know?
The statement provided in the supplemental application that we referred to earlier says there is not a requirement, no, there's no religious practice requirement in giving any organization or agency free use of our space. So that would say that there's no fees involved. We do not really know for the rest of their renovation project, the separate work they want to do apart from the roof, the source of that funding, but they have indicated that they have their own source of funding for other aspects than the roof. But it doesn't sound like from this supplemental that anybody pays to use the list. Includes the Boy Scouts, the Rotary, the Lions, Open Table. It doesn't sound AA. It doesn't sound like they charge them anything. The way they wrote the application.
I have a question. Are those organizations using that building, or are they using other properties that are in that group of buildings? Is it more other, like the church or the Monument Hall, or is it that particular building?
I know the Rotary has used Monument Hall,
Right.
Not Monument Hall, the building next to it.
So is it the building that is being re-roofed?
I believe so. It says the agencies and organizations make use of our space are included but not limited to, and there's about 10 because it goes over to the second page, and then they speak of how their project enhances community meetings.
So Mary, that building was the rectory. That's where the priests lived.
That's right.
Once we went into a collaborative, so I'm a member of that parish. So once we became a collaborative with the Carlisle Church, the priests have now moved out of the rectory in Concord to the Carlisle Rectory,
Right.
That's why the building is being repurposed. So I imagine, so they're creating office space in that building that was the home of the priests. So
I understand. Go ahead. Sorry.
So I was
I
going to say,
understand
so
that,
I
but,
think,
but I'm not
I
sure.
assume that
Go ahead.
whatever space they have, it's probably prospective to say, maybe if somebody met in the hall before, but they will have space now in that building. I think the top floor, they're going to allow, there's going to be meeting rooms that could be used by others. So it may be prospective. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, I believe they currently use, the 3 buildings or the other 2 currently for meetings. But with this renovation project, this will have handicapped accessible meeting spaces, which their other properties I don't believe offer.
Okay, good.
Okay, I'd like to see if we can open up these 2 items, since we're on them and it's fresh in everyone's mind, to the public for questions or comments. So we have a group of 28 attendees. If you would like to offer a comment or ask a question, you have an option on your screen to either raise your hand or type a question into the Q&A box. So those are the 2 ways in which the public may participate. Are there any people who would like to raise their hand or type a question into the question box? So I'm not going to hold this open for too long. We do want to move along. I don't see anything, anybody wishing to raise a question about these. So we'll still have plenty of time for public comment and questioning at the end of the presentation. So John, why don't you move forward with the rest of the slate of proposed projects? CPA.
Mr. Chair,
there is one additional. There's one additional historic preservation project, and Heather, that's slide 6. I'm sorry, slide 8. And that's the Butler Gardens hardscape rehabilitation. This is they sought 100,000. We recommended 100,000. This is for the Friends of Minuteman National Park. It's a nonprofit organization, and you can see from the pictures the rather shoddy condition of the walkways outside the Buttrick home. I believe that this is designed with the upcoming celebrations in 2025 to increase the appearance and safety of the Buttrick Mansion grounds, the Buttrick House grounds. So this did not draw questions on February 6th that I recall, but I'm happy to take them. And Nancy Nelson may be among the group able with us tonight to answer any questions. She's being a member of the CPC.
John, I think it might be easiest if we just go through the rest of the slides and all the projects and then save questions till the end.
Mina?
I just want to check, Mr. Kratzley,
Town Council?
what you need me for any of the other projects. I'm happy to stick around, but it doesn't sound like it. So I appreciate the time. I will say just really quickly, Mr. Banfield, to your question about private parties generally, any private party that gets CPA funding is required to give an agreement back to the town that funding will be protected in perpetuity. So that is one of the limitations on private funding. But
so if the facade of a private home were to be fixed up with this funding, there would be an agreement in place that facade would be retained as it was.
If it was even eligible, yeah. One thing I wanted to confirm, which I haven't been able to during the call, is whether entities other than nonprofits and institutions could even apply. But assuming they could, they still would have to grant a property interest back, a historic preservation restriction back. So
thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate Town Council joining us, and I understand about some of his other obligations tonight that are very professional, like other towns.
Yep. Okay.
I have to make the long commute to Lexington.
Okay.
Let me continue because we'll go right to the start. Slide 4 is the Commonwealth Avenue a home construction project. It's a $300,000 funding of a new home in a slight land that came out of the Gerow purchase. As many of you will recall, there was a very strong interest in whether affordable housing could result from the Gerow land purchase, and this was really the best solution. After the Gerow home was torn down, this piece of land, it's on Commonwealth Avenue with utility hookups, was selected. The design is done. The Concord Housing Authority is sponsoring the project. They may have, and I hope they have tonight, because I can't tell who all's in the audience. I'm hoping they have someone that may be able to answer questions you might have about this. But this is a solution to an affordable housing concern that's been on, I think, the mind of many in planning for this town for some years now, once Gerow became a town property. And I don't believe this had questions at February 6th either. The Regional Housing Services Program is something that we have annually funded through CPC. We are one of a group of towns, 7 towns that are in the Regional Housing Services Program. Almost all the towns pay similar or more. We've been a member since 2011, and they provide a range of services in determining our eligibility for meeting the proper numbers of affordable homes. Heather may want to say a bit more because she's more familiar with it, exactly the functions of this grant.
I think if there's specific questions, we can come back to it.
Okay. That covers the grants for affordable housing. There are 3 projects for open space and recreation. The Gerow Park Improvements Phase 1 is a project that calls for the construction. You can see a little picture of it, a construction of a composting toilet facility and trails very close by to the new toilet facility and close by to the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail and the parking lot for which is already underway, if not finished, at the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. And some of you may have even used it at this point. So this is the first part. That's why it's called Phase 1, the first part of improvements at the Gerow land, but it's located up on the ridge line. It doesn't begin to spend money on the lower part of Gerow land down toward the water, but it's designed to put in a toilet facility and walking paths at the most anticipated use area of the new Gerow Park. And this does anticipate a contribution from the capital budget of $600,000 with CPC funding of $500,000. The next recreation is the Warner Pond Dredging Project, which is a long-term. I know the question came up at the February 6th meeting about banking money or spending money within a given year. In this case, this would be banked for the long-term improvement of the water quality in the pond. It's a $500,000 CPC funding that will permit selected targeted areas. If you talk with Delia Kay about the future plans, there's selected target areas of clearing and dredging in the pond area for better potential swimming and public use. I do believe some of this money will be spent in the first year for a boat launch at the end of the Commonwealth Avenue street, as well as some parking places at the Commonwealth Avenue entry to the pond. The third is the Assabet River pedestrian bridge. This is still the planning stages. This would get the allow to do construction drawings and documents. It would allow for future grants to be sought, future private funding to be sought from the commercial areas that would benefit from the construction of this bridge. There is now a desired location for it, very much adjacent to the railroad bridge. And this is recommended at $250,000. And if Marcia is on the, or Heather, they may be able to answer people's questions about the value of this going forward.
I'm here. Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Hi, this is Kate Hodges, Deputy Town Manager. Is Marcia on the call as well?
I'm looking.
So
There
Kate,
she is. Let me make her. Marcia, you can speak if you'd like.
and Kate may want to
Yes.
speak about the Gerow and the dredging.
Yeah, I was hoping just to provide a little bit of a change because the CPC application only speaks to the bathroom and the pathways up there. But the total project will, in fact, have quite a bit of renovation of the lower part closer to the water. So although it isn't part of the application that we put in this year, it is part of last year's application and last year's capital funding that we have. And if you give me a moment to share my screen, I can show you the rendition that's going to be going to the Conservation Commission for our notice of intent, which we've filed. I don't know, are you able to see
Yep.
that relatively well? So this is the facility that we put in the application for. This right here is the composting toilet. This is actually a post and beam barn-like structure. It's a 3-season. There'll be no heat. Yes, there will be electricity. Really sort of an open air type of pavilion type of concept. And that is being paid for through the Recreation Revolving Fund. They're hoping to spend money to do a post and beam there with our facilities team, putting that in place. The remainder of the funds that we asked CPC for include these connections here that come up here for the roadway, or actually they're asphalt paving up for ADA accessibility, this turnaround that's here, and the ability to have sort of a little type of patio thing with more of a hardscape here with some benches, and then the connections here and here to the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, and then the connection out here to a more wooded section. This is more of the property, but we're not developing this. That'll just be woodlands. And then money that we secured last year and were successful also with CPC and through our capital planning includes this driveway here. And then, of course, this is the site for the affordable home and all of these connections here, the walking paths. These are hardscape and these are more natural stone dust paths. And then depending on what we have left as far as funding, which is also dependent on our capital improvement plan, we have a ADA system here for the dock that comes down and then connects to a small ADA accessible kayak launch here and a fishing pier out here that hopefully comes up right to the water's edge. But that might very possibly be a future phase. And we're going to be bidding it as an ad alternate because we're not sure what the other things will come into. But effectively, everything that you see here on this plan, with the exception of this small piece right here, will be what we're able to accomplish. And we, barring any unforeseen circumstances, would like to start going to bid, even if town meeting is pushed until September, to split it up into phase 1A and B so that we can at least capitalize a little bit on the fall construction season.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marcia on the line, on the call, on the Zoom?
Yes.
Yes, I'm here.
Did you want to speak about the bridge?
Just that we've had some preliminary conversations with Mass DOT, and we are working to see if they would help with the funding for construction. Again, the town would have to come up with the design, and so that's what these funds would be put toward. But if we can work out some agreements with the new owner of 300 Baker Ave to create a pedestrian path from where the bridge outlets onto their property over to Baker Ave, then it would be eligible for state funding for construction. Thank you.
We do have a few more left on the presentation.
Yeah, why don't we let them finish with their slate and we can hold our questions till the end.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are two remaining. The slide number 14 is the application of Minuteman Arc for an outdoor Oasis recreation park. I think we just lost slide 14. There it is. You may recognize the space alongside the Minuteman Arc building. It's currently open, but this is what they propose in the picture to put into that space. A range of opportunities for disabled to have outdoor movement, outdoor space, outdoor dining, outdoor picnicking. This was 100,000. It'll be matched with much of their own money. It meets the needs of the special needs community, and it is going to be open to the public. The last item in our application is the staff and technical support, which supports the work of our senior planner, Heather Gill. She has, and we currently have a good number. I think she gave me recently over 30 open projects. Some come up for closing. All that takes time and energy, as well as the dues that we owe to the state organization, and the signs that you see all over town. So this seems an appropriate expense to keep our work going. That completes our 10 proposed projects in our warrant article 44.
Okay, so now we have time for some finance committee questions, and then we'll try to open up to the public as well. Dee.
I think this is probably best directed to Kate. Kate, if I understand correctly, between Article 11 and the CPC article, that $2.1 million will go to both the Gerow property and Warner's Pond dredging project. And my question to you is, how much are you over time and within the next 5 years anticipating your cost to be, in addition to this $2.1 million this year?
I'm sorry, my costs or our cost for the Gerow property, or relative to the dredging, or both?
It's both.
Okay. I'm going to defer, I think, to Marcia on the dredging concept, because that's actually a conservation commission initiative. What I can tell you is that the feasibility study that was done by ESS quite a while ago, kind of went through the whole watershed plan. And what is being done now are just the two spots that get sort of that, either the highest and best use right now, which is the current boat launch, and then the area where we're hoping that people would canoe out of. When we were going to purchase the Gerow property, there was a great deal of community desire to engage in swimming activities in the pond. Evidently, some number of years ago, lots of people have fond memories of having swimming lessons or whatnot in the pond. And if you recall, around the time we were doing that, we also were told by the White Pond Associates that we were going to be gifted White Pond. And so my thought was that having White Pond available for public swimming might reduce people's desire to swim at the Gerow pond. And so it would just really be for, non-motorized water sports and not waiting. So there isn't any plans in the future to dredge anything relative to making a swimming area, but I don't know whether that desire will resurge. I can't know. So that sort of, that is a very expensive proposition. And I frankly don't believe that we would get as much bang for our buck, honestly, since we have, White Pond right close. So, but again, I think it's up to the community. As far as Gerow is concerned, we have the money that we received last year from CPC, which was $200,000, and then we had additional $500,000 from last year's capital improvement. And so we believe, unless something has gone really awry in the near future, that we'll be able to get about $1.75 million worth of the project, which is why I showed you that new sort of artistic rendition. We believe, as it is right now, that everything that's seen on there, including the smaller kayak launch, will be doable. Now, we'll see when we go out to bid. The COVID situation has been difficult because a lot of the smaller companies, and we have a couple of companies that had bid on some work both at White Pond and at Rideout in the past, had given us very advantageous pricing because they were local and wanted to do it. And I'm not sure those companies were able to not have to furlough employees. So I don't know how that's going to go. The consultants are saying that they're seeing that other projects that they've done in neighboring communities have come in under what they thought the budget was. And if that's the case, we would be done. What I can tell you is that we're looking to leave Gerow with the picture that you see once it's done as is for a bit until we hear what, if anything, people would like. A lot of people have said they want a gazebo, but we're pretty sure that the little barn area will serve that purpose better. And frankly, we're trying to minimize the amount of things that we put on that hill crest because it just ruins the ability to drive into the pond and into the parking lot and see the beautiful pond. We've heard some folks would like a playground. We think we have one right down the road at Rideout, so that might be repetitive. So, we're not planning on the town side to propose anything, but it doesn't mean that the community wouldn't, propose something to the rec commission that may or may not get traction.
Thank you.
Mary.
I have a question. So, Kate, I read a lot of the feedback that you got through your surveys for what people wanted from the Gerow, and I thought, first of all, that was very, very thorough. What I read was I thought people wanted a lot of open space and trails, as opposed to a lot of hardscape and things like that. But I have a follow-up question. Did I hear you say that the money for the dock would come out of the money for the dredging?
Oh, no. We think that we have enough money under the capital plan based on the fact that pricing is coming in advantageous, that we would be able to have enough with the money providing that our capital plan for this year passes and this article passes. We believe we'd have enough to be able to do something small in a kayak launch there.
So would that be coming out of the money earmarked for the dredging, the $500,000 for the dredging?
No.
It would be money from the Gerow.
From the capital, capital article.
Yep. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Any further questions?
I just want to see, Marcia, did I represent the dredging adequately, or is there something that I missed?
Well, the $500,000 is the beginning. We will be back for additional funding. I believe that the estimates had been about $3 million to do this small portion that we are anticipating dredging, and I can't remember if it was 6 acres or 9 acres out of the 52-acre pond.
It was 9.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we are not planning to come back again for any additional. So it's the 9 acres out of 52. And that is anticipated to increase the life, the ability to use the pond for recreational purposes such as boating, kayaking, fishing, and maybe even ice skating for another 50 to 100 years, depending on how much construction activity goes on upstream and the amount of siltation. So this is just a 1 year, the first year of possibly 1 or 2 into the future.
Thank you, Marcia.
I just wanted to just let folks know, when you go over to the Gerow park or parcel area, at least last year during the months of July and August and early September, you were unable to actually pass through with a kayak because most of the things that are coming up and growing. So it really is sort of a necessary thing, and it was necessary before even the acquisition of the Gerow property came about. I know that Marcia and Delia had been working on this for years. And I just think, while they both complement each other, great, it is as a standalone, a really, really important project.
Okay. Wade, you have a question?
So Marcia, am I to understand that there's $2 million more dollars of future requests?
I don't know if it'll be 2 million. I know that the town has set aside funds for this in its capital improvement projects, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me, so I'm sorry. But it depends on how much funding is recommended by the Community Preservation Committee in future years. I believe we are trying to get a total of 1.5 million from CPC funds and 1.5 from the town, but I don't have the numbers right in front of me.
And the $500,000 this year is applied to that 1.5 million. So it's still $1 million of CPC money that we're counting on.
Yes.
And we'll match it with $1 million.
At least, yes.
Okay.
Any more questions from the FinCom?
Sorry, it's 500,000 for fiscal year 21 that was proposed, and 1.5 million for next year from capital.
Right. That's right.
So whether that's supplemented with CPC funds or not, that is what Article 11 will have in its text.
Can I ask one more question? Is
one more? We got to get to the
one more. Okay. Is there a big cost differential for dredging for invasives versus dredging for boating?
No.
Okay.
Okay. So I have 2 questions that have come up on the chat, and why don't I just recognize these folks to just speak, and maybe we can do it that way rather than have me reading the chat questions. So I'm going to recognize Dory Keogh, what can I do? Can I allow you? There you go. Okay, Dory, you can weigh in.
Yeah, thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
When the whole proposition of Gerow land was proposed a number of years ago, it was with a clear statement and made by a still member of the select board. This will be a wonderful place for the people of West Concord to swim, period. It is now morphed into something other than just a place to swim. But of course, that was never possible to swim at at Warner's Pond at the time, because it's not deep enough. We skate there and you can see it'd be very easy to fall in because there's no bottom. Because the bottom. So I'm concerned about where is this leading? This is not what was anticipated. This is not what people voted on. When people voted on this, they had no idea that White Pond was even a dream in the town's future. And so where is the end to this? In a time when I hope we're being careful and thinking about, especially today, not even just when we voted, but in the time when towns are going to have to be looking carefully, I'm really concerned that we're heading down a path that was never, ever anticipated. I'm concerned. Thank you.
Would you like me to respond to that?
No, not necessarily. If Dean wants you to.
No, I don't know that was more of a comment. Kate, I don't know that it needs to be I don't need to know that it needs to be responded to. It's more of a comment. We have one other comment here from Matt Johnson. Matt, would you like to just talk to us? I'm going to let you in. And there you go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So my comment is.
Oh. Can't hear him.
What happened? Hold on.
He's muted.
The host just muted me. Okay.
I'm sorry. I intended to knock Dory out. I must have clicked the wrong button.
All right. Anyway.
Sorry.
Considering the near and long-term budgetary impact of the pandemic, we're going to have to make some tough
Oops.
as a town. So is there any benefit of doing some of the proposed CPA projects this year in order to save CPA funds for high priority projects next year when the property tax receipts and state matching funds will be reduced? That's especially the case if some of the related town capital funding for a project is likely to be deferred as well to save in this next year. So that's a question, I guess, for the CPC, but also for the Finance Committee.
Excuse me.
I'll yield the floor.
Let's start with the CPC. It's their funding proposal. So let's let them comment first, and then maybe if the Finance Committee wants to weigh in on that question, I'll open it to the Finance Committee.
Yeah, I have not heard from any member of the CPC a sentiment to change or adjust the recommendations in Article 44. It seems that we would, I think, I don't know that I can speak for, I certainly don't feel that I can speak for all of the members, except that there has been a consistent uniformity in bringing Article 44 forward, knowing that those funds are available and are actually needed by the applicants at this particular time. So it seems to me that that would have to go on we would obviously be listening to advice from the Finance Committee. That would go to town meeting as well as the floor of town meeting regarding any changes in the allocations at the present time. That would be my opinion.
So to just lead off as a Finance Committee meeting, as a Finance Committee comment, we are going to have to grapple with the set of capital articles which were presented at the previous hearing. And then we're going to have to do, these things are sort of interlocked. And my presumption is, and we started down that road prior to this hearing, but we have a lot of work to do to get our recommendations aligned. And so it is likely that what we will do as a Finance Committee before we recommend is sort of work with these things in the way that they're being presented to the town, and that is as linked applications for funds. And if we were to recommend an affirmative action on, say, a capital component, it is highly likely we would also suggest that the same capital piece would be recommended for affirmative action within the CPC and vice versa. But I think that as a committee, it will be on us to sort of wrestle with these things which are dovetailed between town capital requests and this funding and the CPC funding. And I'll open up to the Finance Committee for further comment.
I'll make a comment. I think the CPC funding for FY21 is still pretty secure, because I think that the matching money from the state is coming in on future money is questionable, but I think the money for FY21, if I read the memo correctly that Dee referred to earlier, I think we're not vulnerable there. And I think the money that the CPC will get from the surcharge is okay, because that's based on last year's tax revenues. It's the future years for CPC that we have to worry about. That's my understanding. The town side, the town capital plan side, that's a whole other story. And that's something that we will have to be talking about later when the Finance Committee puts its attention on what we recommend for this particular article. And I think that's going to be a different conversation. That's just what I'm thinking now.
Any further Finance Committee comments? Okay, well, I think we've come to a conclusion. I don't see any current outstanding questions from, or people trying to raise their hand from the audience. So I am going to say, John, thank you for your presentation, and we're going to move on to our next agenda item.
Mr. Chairman, let me just thank all the members of the FinCom, as well as my own committee members who attended, as well as the applicants who attended, as well as Heather, our senior planner and town council. I appreciate the opportunity to present what has been a very long year, reaching a set of, I think, very thoughtful proposals that, by and large, what over 3/4 of that money benefits the town.
Okay. So I think next up, Steve Ledoux is our representative on the Minuteman Tech Committee, but I'm not sure, Steve, if you're the one who will be doing the presentation. Maybe you can introduce us and kick us off, and then if we have to, hand it over, we can give it to one of your people. You're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's certainly been an interesting year for Minuteman Tech, basically opening up a new building and having a banner year for applicants. It's been really, really terrific. And then, of course, COVID-19 hit. I want to introduce Bob Girardi. He's our finance director. He'll be walking you through the presentation for the FY21 Minuteman budget. So I think Bob's on. So
he is.
I'll turn to him.
Bob, you should unmute your mic.
Hey.
There you go. If you want to share a screen or have a presentation, that you can do that.
Yeah, I would like to, I'll start off by thanking a few people from Concord, and then I will share my screen so I can share with you a PowerPoint. So I wanted to start off by thanking Steve. He's been a wonderful resource to Minuteman as our Minuteman School Committee representative. He's also on the Finance Committee, and he's just a wealth of knowledge. So he's been a great resource for us at Minuteman. And I also want to thank Christine Reynolds, who is the Concord FinCom liaison to Minuteman. She attends all of our school committee meetings, and she does her due diligence. So wanted to thank both of them. Before I got started, now I'm going to share the PowerPoint, if that's okay with you. Let me get to shared screen. And I'm hoping that everybody can see our PowerPoint. Does that look good?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, so I'd like to start off.
Full screen mode. We might not see your notes, but that's your call whether you want to have us see your notes or not.
How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, that's probably there you go.
Okay. So you can see that this is our budget proposal. Our budget theme is managing our success. And that beautiful picture is looking out the front doors over the Lexington skyline, what we see every day when we walk out of Minuteman. The next slide is actually the reverse of that picture. It's looking at the front doors of Minuteman. And, this is a building that is just an amazing, inspirational building with untapped potential. I say it's got untapped potential because it was built with the school committee's vision to support very specific programming, some relatively new program and developing programs on the cutting edge of technology. So everybody feels blessed to be part of Minuteman, and I know I do. There's a journey and a history. That's why we labeled this this presentation "Managing Our Success," because there's been a lot of fulfilled expectations getting here. After a 5-year effort beginning in 2010, Minuteman members voted for a new regional agreement. In 2016, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education approved a capital fee on non-district towns. The new building was built 1 year ahead of schedule and on budget. And the most amazing result of all this is that we've seen increased enrollment from member towns, and that's resulted in only 14 out-of-district freshmen this fall. Enrollment beyond the design capacity of 628, we're projected at 649. and a waiting list for member and non-member students. We've seen a turnaround in enrollment that we haven't seen in fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21. This slide kind of represents that in chart form. You can see in dark blue that the member towns have increased significantly over the last 3 years. The withdrawing towns and non-member towns have decreased significantly. And we're projecting out that in 3 to 4 years, there will likely be only member district students at minimum. The budget that we're proposing tonight is $20,931,014, which is an increase of 6.4% in our operating budget. The building project debt service is $4,571,932, $4,571,932, which is an increase of about 47% in our budget. This was the big year when the debt that has been borrowed has come in, and it's a big expense, and it's a big increase in our budget. Like most other districts, we have similar increases in drivers. Some of ours are related to things like the enrollment increase, and others are to the debt service. So district technology went up because we have a one-to-one initiative, but we had the largest freshman class enroll in decades this year. Next year, we're going to have another banner year as far as enrollments. So we're seeing huge expenses in district technology. Transportation is going up, which seems counterintuitive because we are losing a member district, but the cost for transportation has significantly increased. And in fact, we had a bid opening that was above this. And so we've actually rebid it. And tomorrow we'll have another bid opening. And we're hoping to get bids that will be at this level. So we knew it was going to be expensive this year, going out for a new 5-year bid for transportation. We've already found it will be, but we're hoping to get down to that number. Things like athletic services, we haven't developed our fields yet. And so we have to rent more fields for our students to participate in their sports. And of course, the bonds, like I said, came in this year. So those expenses significantly increased this year, although we did get a great rate on the new bond that we went out for this year. The last item that I just clicked on was the Belmont departure. That did impact this budget significantly, and it impacted each member district based on enrollments and the other factors. In Concord's case, your increase would have been $103,483 less approximately. So having Concord leave the district had a big impact on all of the member districts. And for Concord, it's about $103,000. This is a breakout of the preliminary assessments with a total assessment of $1,213,873. And you can see the breakout between the building project and the other expenses. And this is the breakout of the actual increases and decreases in the assessment. And again, those are often related to student enrollment, which Concord has had pretty stable student enrollment, increasing, but not as much as a lot of the other member districts. So full enrollment is now here. And we use this slide to kind of highlight that past and then, managing our success. In the past, low member enrollment was the norm. And now the new norm is that we almost have full member enrollment, and ultimately we will. Full access to all programs, students could pick their programs. And now we're seeing waiting lists for member districts, let alone non-member districts. And member districts have a priority. 30 to 40% non-member districts will be 0 members by fiscal year 24 if the projections are true. And as a result, non-members will escape that capital fee. So that capital fee that we've been using to offset the debt service will likely go away in 4 years. So the new norm, it's managing our success is the new norm. This next slide shows historical enrollment so that you can see how there was a decline in overall enrollment over the course of many, many years. But in the last 2 years, how that enrollment has significantly increased. The color coding also identifies the member districts during those periods. So at one time, we had 16 members. Over the last 3 years, we had 10 members. And fiscal year 21 shows that we'll only have the 9 member districts that will be maintained. As far as very specific Concord 8th grade applications and admissions, we had 14 applications this year for the freshman class coming up in fiscal year 21. 9 were admitted. And as of April 30th, 9 of those that were admitted committed to come to Minuteman, which brings you to a total of 28 students who will be in Minuteman next year. This is a little budget history slide because we do want to make sure that everybody knows that when we did have declining enrollment, you can see years where the operating budget was decreased significantly. And, the administrators talk about right-sizing the building then. As we now have these changes where we're having increasing enrollment, we have to right-size the building to accommodate the full membership. And so that's what we've done this year, is to right-size the building for the number of students and the programs that are going to be operating in the budget in fiscal year 21. So we go to the slides on challenges now and ahead. The withdrawal of the towns from the regional districts means that fewer members will be sharing in capital and operating expenses. So the great news is that our member districts are using the facilities, but now we won't have those extra resources to help offset the cost. High enrollment will create waiting lists for students desiring high quality career and technical education who live both in and out of district. We're already seeing that this year. And little of or no out of district enrollment means reduced or non-existing tuition revenue, which we've used this year in this year's budget, and I'll show you later on, to try and offset some of the expenses more than we have in the past, and also the capital fees to offset the assessments regarding debt. So again, it's tough managing our success. This slide actually shows you our revenue plan. You can see that where the operating budget was increasing by 6.9%. Our original estimate was over 9%, 9.5, I think, but we were able to, again, try to reduce where we could and try to be as prudent as possible to get it down to that number. We also increased between fiscal year 20 and 21. If you look at the current year tuition, I mentioned that in the past, we've put in about $400,000 of current year tuition to help offset the capital costs and the total budget. And this year, we've increased that to $600,000. And the non-resident capital fee is listed in fiscal year 21 as well, because this is the first year we have it to help offset assessments. So there's one more. That link that you'll see on the screen right now is a wonderful link of the first day at Minuteman. You'll see the students and staff, their reaction to this wonderful new school, and they are so eloquent in speaking about the benefits it has to them educationally already. So I would encourage you to go to that. We actually have a couple of extra slides on this, but those slides really talk about the amazing programming we offer, and that's for people to read and get to know that our students are succeeding at extremely high rates. But that said, this is really the question and answer period. So if there's any questions that people would like to ask of me, I'd be happy to speak to them.
Well, thank you. I'll start it off with a very simple question. As we are now seeing that the school is starting to be populated by only member towns, I was just noticing the selectivity that was obvious in the Concord applications. 14 applied, 5 were declined, or 5 withdrew. It's not clear why 5 were not accepted, but that's a pretty, for an alternate school opportunity, that seems like a pretty, stiff bar that 5 out of 14 are not accepted. So hopefully this doesn't get worse. You don't want to, have a high selectivity.
This is Ed Boquillan. I'm the superintendent. I'd like to respond to that, Chairman. We cannot assume that those 5 were denied applicant. We had a lot of students who didn't complete the application, and normally we try to put that in there. Of the students that want to come, 100% of them that we offered admission to came. So I believe the other 5, probably most of them were not complete applications within the time frames that we require.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I was going to add, the selection process is a process that everyone goes through. And so sometimes along the way, not everybody, follows through. So I was going to add the same thing.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Mary.
I have a question. It seems to me that the assessment that Concord has in its budget right now for both operating and the debt is not that much different than you presented to us on February 13th. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm wondering, I know that a lot's changed. You said it yourself because of the pandemic. And right now we're kind of consumed with the health and safety, but there is an economic fallout that's going to hit us pretty quickly. And I'm wondering, are you getting pressure from the other member towns to look at spending? And if you have, what are your thoughts right now on how you could cut spending, because we're all going to be facing some fiscal constraints?
Well, that's a complex question, if you don't mind. We're a regional school district, and as you know, if we don't have the majority of our towns pass our budget by June 30th, we have to go on a 1/12 budget. We're preparing for that 1/12 budget, which is based upon this fiscal year. So we're looking at a worst case scenario, hoping for the best. But if your question is, are we getting pressure from other towns? The answer is no. The pressure that we're putting on our budget is coming from us because we know the challenges that are facing all of us in this time. We're pretty sure the governor's budget numbers are not going to be the ones that hold up. House Ways and Means is supposed to come up with some numbers very soon. I imagine they're going to be fairly conservative in revenue projections,
right? And
we'll have to respond to that.
Right.
Sort of as an aligned question, and there I'm going in the darkness. I have a motion sensitive. Kids left the lights on way too many times, and they ended up with this motion sensitive thing. So in this mode where we've just shut down the schools and everybody's trying to do distance learning, technical education is severely impacted because a lot of it is very hands-on. There's a lot of, there's a lot of things that you do by manipulating the environment, whether it's auto mechanics or baking cakes or whatever that it might be, or even working in a biotech lab setting. There's a lot of things that you do that don't really respond well. How are you managing that scenario now? And as we move towards the fall, how are you managing to think about that?
Well, it's being managed. I'm sorry. Career and technical education in this state has a very high bar. It's very hands-on. It's very rigorous academics and very relevant career and technical competencies. There are industry-recognized credentials we're preparing kids for. And we've been able to work with some of the licensing boards. When I say we, I mean the entire state of career tech educators. The licensing boards have agreed to provide our seniors with up to 75 hours, give or take, depending on the trade, with counting online instruction towards their hours, towards an apprenticeship license or a credential of some kind. So it hasn't been anything we've had to do alone. The challenges for providing online learning in a remote distance learning, it's impossible. You can't do it, There are some online simulations which have become very sophisticated over the last few years, and some of our programs are doing some of that. The vocational technical teachers are very skilled when it comes to using the technologies we've been deploying. Since the beginning of March, we were actually preparing for a closure before the closure happened. We took time off. We closed school for a couple of days so teachers could all get trained. We could make sure everyone had the technology. This is the first week of March or so. So we're doing the best we can. There's a lot of checking in going on. I don't think we're going to have much opportunity to do anything prior to summer when it comes on helping kids start to practice those competencies, regain what they've lost. And looking towards the fall, we're planning to have a staggered opening. We're already over the design enrollment of the school. Those of you who know the Minuteman saga will know that we tried to get a larger school than we ended up getting.
Yeah.
Some people wanted a much smaller school than we have. But our design enrollment is 628. We're going to be 30, 40 kids over that in the fall. So we're not going to be able to have a full school. We know that. So we're looking at prioritizing CTE instruction, prioritizing freshman academics in math and English especially, and letting them have a good experience for exploratory. This is not a long-term sustainable situation for career and tech ed as it's offered in the state of Massachusetts. Right. If it goes much beyond, I'm looking at the post-vaccine world is going to be even not normal. So we're trying to stay ahead of what we know is best for our kids, what the industry requires us to be able to do. And, the Department of Education hasn't been focused on CTE, but fortunately we have enough superintendents in the state. And fortunately the commissioner has kind of given us the go-ahead to do what's best for us. So we're planning on a COVID environment for the next 6 months. I'm planning on, budget-wise, we're going to have smaller classes. We may have to have more buses. Every regional school superintendent's going through some of these things, and CTE, it's just remarkably challenging. And, this week is Teacher Appreciation Week, which I'll remind you all to thank your teachers in Concord and Carlisle and Concord-Carlisle Regional for the great work they're doing, because it is remarkable work.
Thank you very much. Other questions from the committee? Well, thank you, Adam. Let's look and see if we have any questions from the rest of the attendees. I don't see anybody with their hand raised at the moment. So thank you. I think we can move on to our next agenda item, which is the
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Steve.
Yes.
Thank Bob.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Dean, this is Prosher. Are we voting on each of these at a time?
No, this is the hearing. We will meet prior to the next hearing for 30 minutes. And if there are things that we can get out of the way quickly with recommendations, we'll just brush them up and recommend whatever we think. And just like we did tonight. But there will be some that are going to require discussion and, further debate. So we're going to need a full meeting to get to our full slate of recommendations.
Yep. No, I forgot we were at the hearing. Sorry. Thanks.
Okay. No, it's okay. All right. So next up, I think, is the superintendent. Lori, are you on?
I'm on.
And Jared is standing by. So this is the public schools budget, article number 25.
Right. Thank you. Jared is here too. So we're both here. And I know there's school committee attending and listening in and available should we need them. So we had talked with Dean earlier today and just thought we'd kind of set a expectation for this conversation. We actually made the slides. This is a little haunting in some ways. We made the slides March 11th. I closed school on the afternoon of March 12th, and we haven't been back since. So the slides that I'm going to scan through just to remind us where we left off, we know don't reflect current reality. We've started those conversations already with the school committee. So I think we want to spend as much time sharing with you what we already shared with the school committee 2 weeks ago about the current status of FY20 and 21 as best as we know it, with a really big, long list of unknowns. I heard Ed tell you a whole bunch of what those unknowns are. So we're really coming here tonight saying, we know this is an ongoing conversation. We know we've got a lot of things to play out ahead of us. We know that FY21 might be one situation and 22 be another. We want to make that a collaborative discussion and assure you that we're responsibly and conservatively managing what we have for FY20, knowing that there's a lot more to come in terms of information and strategy and discussion with you folks and Carlisle. I was actually juggling between 2 meetings tonight because Carlisle was meeting too. There's a gift of the virtual. I can be in 2 places at once, literally. But we're at a pretty high level in both communities because there's just not enough information yet. So that said, we thought it would be helpful to remind you where we were. And then Jared's going to go through our current status. And then I think we're open for discussion and any feedback. We know this is the first time you've met since the crisis started. So I'm sure it's a brand new discussion too, but I can hear hints of all the concerns you're having, just as we would have expected. So if you'll just bear with me, then we'll quickly go through where we were with the CPS budget, quickly go through the CPS capital, which is within the town manager's allocation, quickly remind you where we are with the regional budget. We are not moving the parking lot article. The school committee voted that about 2 weeks after we closed school. So that is not on your list of things to need to consider anymore. It's really just the 2 budgets and the very traditional capital piece that goes within the town manager's budget. So just a real quick review of that, and then Jared will take it over. I am going to screen share this so you can see the slides. So here is where we were. The school committee had voted a budget in December of the $40,782,874. Just a real high-level reminder of our drivers, salaries being obviously significant, some special ed tuitions, although we're managing that better and better all the time. This shows some increase to assistant principals, but that was a trade-off so that the actual salaries of the teachers went down. So those were our major drivers going into the budget creation. Our cost savings, we can reduce considerably in special ed contractual services and some transportation. And so that is where we were with the reductions, and for a total increase of 3.54%, which was a level service budget. That was not yet synced up with your guideline, you remember. The recommendation, the revised recommendation was 3.29%. So we still had a delta of 97,000 to talk through. So that's where we were on that. Do we want to do one at a time, or you want me to just get through this and let Jared go, and then we can talk through it all?
I think you could just move right on to Jared's memo and Jared's assessment of where we are and
sure
that stuff.
Sure. And just, I do feel like I want to remind you that we came in under guideline on the regional budget, just to remember that. So
yeah,
we're in good shape there. Doesn't mean it's going to stay status quo, but we did come in under. And the capital is really straightforward. Some energy replacement units is the bulk of it. So Jared, they're most interested in hearing where we are.
All right. So I'll just quickly go through this. I hopefully you received this beforehand. But I
know I got it to Dean. I don't know if they've all gotten it, so don't assume that.
Okay. So last month, the Ways and Means held a virtual economic roundtable with the state treasurer, the president of the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, the president of the Mass Budget and Policy Center, and a number of professors and experts in the field. They all expressed that we're in the midst of a very fluid situation, and until the virus peaks, projections are really to be taken lightly. Some of the major takeaways, as I stated here in my memo, was Mass has one of the largest rainy day funds at $3.48 billion, and we may be in better shape than many other states to use a portion of that fund. Projected decline in tax revenues by more than $4.4 billion, in withheld taxes to decline by about $1.2 billion. Again, these are all assumptions, projections. As you know, unemployment rates are going to increase. They have increased. The GDP is expected to fall between 5 and 7%. And lastly, and maybe the most importantly, they're expecting, or should I say, hoping for a V-shaped recovery, depending on the longevity of the virus. But they also think it could be an L or a U or a W-shaped recovery. They just don't know yet. And as Mr. McQuillan said at the last at Minuteman, we're not going to know until the Ways and Means come out. So over the past month and a half, pretty much my days have been filled with Zoom conferences with DESE, roundtables with my colleagues from Mass Association of Business Managers and Mass Association of Regional Schools. And we're trying to get up-to-date information regarding state revenues and projections, and there really just isn't any updates. They're all assumptions. They won't know anything until the Ways and Means comes. One thing we do know is the governor most likely will not have a budget before June 30th. So to prepare for this, I've been in closeout mode at the region as well as the K-8 for over a month. I've liquidated or zeroed out purchase orders to increase available balances, which is something that we don't become really aggressive on until mid-May. What I did is I moved these available balances and supplies and materials, equipment, et cetera, to contingency lines in both budgets. We have frozen on all non-essential spending. It's important for me to have real up-to-date numbers so I can plan for next year's budget. So as of April 13th, the Concord school budget had an unencumbered balance of $929,701. Although this is a bit fluid and the available balance is not what we're going to have at the end. I go into detail in this memo and I explain by DESE 1000 function what makes up the balances. We also have revolving accounts such as special ed circuit breaker and the food service account that needs to get back to where we started to plan for future years. The region has an unencumbered balance of $826,680. Like the Concord Public Schools budget, this is a result of a number of purchase order liquidations, freezing all non-essential spending. And then the athletic, food service, and circuit breaker revolving account balance also needs to be replenished with that remaining balance. In addition to the general fund side of things, I'm watching the revenues intensely. I do not feel that there'll be any real reductions in FY20. FY21 and FY22, I'm already looking ahead, will be a different story. So at this time, I'm still projecting for FY20 a $331,849 surplus in revenue for FY20. This will help us greatly in FY21 and hopefully beyond when revenues will be reduced. This money will be moved to our E&B balance, which will get us close to the maximum percentage of 5%, and we're currently certified at 4%. And as you can see, here are my projected excess revenue.
So I think, yeah, go ahead. So that's our current status. The goal here that we are very clear, and the school committee in full agreement, that we're trying to use what we can now to save for the rainy days to come. If E&D goes to 5% and we reinstate circuit breaker to what we're allowed to carry there, which is equivalent to whatever aid we've received for the current fiscal year, Jared?
Yep.
That would give us reserves that we would benefit from as we plan with you on FY21. And in some likelihood, we expect we may still have some left to return to both towns. We can't project that quite yet or give you a number, but given that Jared's called this, the monster of all budget freezes here. So we can get a pretty good handle. Our costs are fairly static. We've done a little spending on technology software to get our remote learning running, and there's not a lot of room for surprise left, I say with great laughter at this point as everything changes every day. But we think fiscally it's pretty steady as we go here through June 30th. So that's our goal, is to build our reserves, work with you on any overage of the 5%, and then use all of that to help offset needs in 21 and 22 and revenue concerns that might come up. Jared, do you want to just talk on the bit of projected things we've heard about where the revenue cuts might be,
Sure.
Especially at the regional levels?
Yeah. So at the regional level, what they're going to probably look at first is regional transportation. They'll most likely reduce that. Circuit breaker reimbursement, what they were proposing this year was reimbursing 25% of the transportation costs that they never reimbursed us for in the past. So, which is good because the initial governor's budget had that in there. So most likely they would cut that, and then that would, be less of a cut for the regular circuit breaker revenue that we're expected. We get about 75% of the costs that after a certain threshold. Chapter 70, they may reduce that. I'm not expecting a ton, but those are the areas the main three areas that they will most likely use.
In the event that you do hit the 5% cap and have, other funds that you can't keep them in E&D, is there an opportunity to apply them to OPEB without returning them, or would you just then return them to the contributing towns?
Yeah, you could do that. Yep, you could pay OPEB. Right now we have
just can't stay with us, right, Jared? Can't stay in E&D.
Correct. So for over the 5%. You also have your revolving accounts that you can only have a certain amount in those. And we were pretty healthy going into this year. Anything after that, you are allowed to prepay tuitions, collaborative tuitions. You are allowed to pay 100%. We don't have many of those. And you can pay up to 3 months worth of the other tuitions going into next year. And that's something that we do year after year and plan for that.
Okay, thank you.
But the whole goal is to not only, FY21 is going to be very tough, but it's really going to be FY22. So we're really looking ahead for 22 and trying to save and buy now if we can, just to get ahead going forward.
So it's very fluid now, and I appreciate your candor about where things are and just the amount of effort that you're putting in to try to kind of grapple with it all. But fundamentally, we're going to need to come to a number that town meeting is going to vote for. And that we're in a really challenging position to figure out how we even throw a dart at that wall. Because, we need to wrestle with it to the point where we actually have a number that, the FinCom approves as a guideline. You may propose for either the region or K8 different numbers than we're looking at. So our committee is going to need to have a few meetings that are revisiting our guideline and try to wrestle with some of the more macro factors that you mentioned at the top end of this memo. And then in the end, you're going to need to put a number on each of these budgets that you're asking for, that the town will then be trying to work with at town meeting. So the town cannot work with this memo where it's going to need a number. That's really all I'm saying. So it's going to be hard.
We know that. And I think we were actually grateful to get an opportunity tonight to start that conversation with you. And I think certainly for the high school, it's going to have to be a collaborative conversation with Carlisle, who's trying to come up with the same number with a different kind of approach. So we want to do that with you and not in isolation. And so let's figure out how to get to that.
Can I ask a question? I'm curious.
Yep.
You raised the idea of putting some money into OPEB, sort of paying it forward a little bit. By what date does that decision have to be made?
Really before July 1st.
And so I'm kind of curious, what would be the process by which you would sort of make that decision? Would you send recommendations to the two towns and Concord? Can you talk a little bit about that process so that we can get a sense of whether or not we'll be able to provide input as a committee?
Right. I mean, I think it's the school committee's decision as the region to either put more monies into OPEB, or they can, any excess they can authorize for me to prepay tuitions is normally what they do. So as you know, with OPEB, if we have monies, whatever monies we have in there, we can use that money, not that we would ever look to take money out of the OPEB account, but we can use that OPEB monies to pay for retiree health insurance if we come short in future years. But I don't think it's a big process to increase that amount. I think it's school committee discretion.
And Jared, the other point might be that just as this is a new idea that we haven't actually spoken about yet, and certainly aren't speaking for the school committee, but then you could take FY20 to help offset the number that's in the 21 budget and perhaps maintain educational services, depending on where we land with the total budget. So
yep.
This is the creative collaborative discussion. We haven't get all the options on the list, and then each committee starts to discuss them.
Other questions from the finance
school committee makes by itself, or is that something that has to be taken to town meeting? I'm trying to understand the process.
I'm sorry, I missed that question.
So is that a decision the school committee makes by itself, or is that something that has to be taken to town meeting?
OPEB is actually a general fund expenditure. So by authorizing the budget, I believe that it already passed whatever that budget number is. Yes. So I do not believe that OPEB has to go to town meeting to increase that portion.
So Parish, my understanding is, and I'm happy to be corrected, we as a town vote one number as our authorization for the school, both the K-8 system and also for our portion of Concord Carlisle. And then the school committee is responsible for managing that number and manipulating where the buckets are and where it gets expended. And so once it's been, authorized, it can be moved to a different accounting bucket if necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Dean, it's Wally. Can I step in here for a sec?
Sure.
This is new. While this has been going on, we've been setting up a meeting for later this week. So we will be having a joint meeting on Friday at 11, expressly to talk about some of these issues that now that both finance committees of each town have started to talk more detailed about budgets. We wanted to get together and be able to talk amongst ourselves about where we might all be headed here. You're right about the OPEB piece, but I think in this case, I would certainly recommend to the school committees that any of these sorts of things we would not make these decisions about things like OPEB in a vacuum. Certainly would want input. These are uncertain times. And I think it's going to be important that we all work together to do the best thing we can for the communities and for the students. And so that seems to be the tenor of what I'm hearing among members. That'll all be more clear on Friday.
Thank you, Wally. Appreciate that.
Mary.
I've got a comment. First of all, I want to thank you for looking ahead at this. I'm really encouraged by the work that you've done here. And your point that FY22 might be even harder is, I agree with you. I'm glad you're thinking that far ahead. I just got two comments. One is, I know you've thought about this, but are there incremental expenses that you're going to have to either train teachers or some kind of technology because of this new learning mode that we're in now. That's one thing. And I didn't hear you say anything about that. So that's one question I have. And then the other thing is, you're looking at, I know you're looking at ways that revenues could be decreasing for transportation or Chapter 70, but there are other revenues that are outside of the school budget that it will impact our ability to fund, and that's local receipts. So, the Finance Committee looks at the impact upon property tax, and we depend upon a certain level of local receipts, and that's right now that's very, very vulnerable. So you might want to keep that in your your thinking as well. So it's not just funding to you; it's funding to the town that you might be asked to help regenerate. Or I'm losing my word, but you get my point. Anyway, those are the comments I have.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, we definitely are aware of that. And that's part of why we're offering everything we are tonight, to be sure you all know we're aware of that. In terms of, the way we're doing things right now, we're just hobbling our way here with our best efforts to keep things intact for kids. And the good news is that because we're well supported in technology, grades 6 through 12 was a really simple process because those kids already have laptops. K-5, we've supplemented here and there, maybe 25, 30 families where they needed access. The bulk of the money we've spent, which is by far less than we would have spent if school were open, was to upgrade subscriptions to educational platforms so that we had a robust, rich suite of options across content and grade levels. That really what we're building is the next phased plan, which for us, we're rolling out phase 3 next week. We'll be on phase 4 by the fall, since this started March 13th. Phase 4 is much of what I think you heard Minuteman alluding to, is trying to best predict. And this is where one of our challenges will be is best predict the contingencies we have to have for such an unknown environment in the fall, and make sure those are reflected in the budgets while we work with you on the numbers. And if it's phased, if we're staggering kids and doing extra runs of buses, we might pick up some costs there. If we're cleaning more, can we keep up with the level of cleaning? I'm hearing some places, some of the recommendations that are starting to float out are, 2 and 3 times a day, you're just constantly wiping. We don't have the daytime staff that might be able to handle that necessarily. That's the hard work I think we have to do as we work with you on numbers. We have to be doing that simultaneously to the budget discussions. So we are actively getting ready for this phase 4 and even projecting into phase 4 already. Once we're into the second part of May, that is our primary effort, is to make all those contingency plans of a rich, robust educational environment that can fluidly adapt to whatever happens. Everything from we're back in school fairly normally, which I doubt normal will be normal at all the way to we're back, out of school for an extended period. So we want to build that and make sure we've got that, 1, so it's predictable educationally, but 2, so it's fiscally predictable too, and start to strategize all of that. So your question is exactly spot on, and probably the top priority of our work now that we're stabilizing the spring. So.
D.
I have just a question about your staffing and your teachers. How do you backfill if someone has to leave and be quarantined? What do you do with that, and what kind of cost is associated with that?
Yeah, so and Wally was with me with the union leaders today to hear, and Court, who's I think on the call too, listening. The teachers have been incredibly resilient. So as people have had needs come up, we've had very little where they've said, I'm just not able to do it. And we haven't had a group of people just swarm in and fill the void. So there hasn't been like, we need long-term substitutes or anything like that. In fact, we've pretty much zeroed out our substitute costs at this point. They're collaborating and working in teams and taking on work for each other and filling in when others can't. And there's been no master plan for that. It's just evolved out of the great cooperative efforts they're offering. So right now, that's the answer. That's part of our work, I think, with the leaders of the union to better strategize that in this fluid environment, because I actually worry that nobody's taking sick time in this time right now. We know we've had sick teachers and had family members get very ill and even worse, and people are just doing what they need to do, and we need a plan. But right now it's really fairly cost neutral. Our message to parents has been that we aren't assuring coverage if we get to that point, Dee. So we're doing the best to offer it, but if there's just a void we cannot fill, we've told parents there's a potential of that.
And one last question I have you ever been collaborating with our libraries, the town libraries, and what has happened since they've been closed?
Yeah, actually, I'm working really closely with the libraries. They stay in touch with me constantly about the remote programs they're putting together.
Okay.
I'm pushing all of those out to the school community, and I hear from them regularly that when I do that, they get a much better response. So we've made that a pretty standing practice. Usually they give me 2 weeks worth at a time and I send it out. So they've been hosting author sessions and online readings. I think kids were invited to read to a dog one morning this week through the virtual opportunities. So we've been very collaborative. I'd say that's true of all the town departments and leaders, and just a really nice ebb and flow of support and opportunities and creativity.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Wait.
Hey, Laurie, can you speak to food security? Are you still distributing meals to the schools, and will that continue through the summer? Do you have a plan? And is that coming out of school budget, or is there other budget for that?
So Jared, I'm going to throw that one to Jared to talk on the food provisions and how we're funding that and what our plan is.
So right now we're doing about 30 to 40 bags per day. Each bag is about $15. So far, 100% of that has been funded through donations. I think the last time I checked Friday, I think we were up around 36,000, give or take. We don't believe we're going to be getting any reimbursement. We're continuing to look into that from the state. But we have enough monies and donations, we think, to get us through a few more weeks where we are getting more coming in daily. So we plan to run this through June 19th, which is the last day of school. We are going into Boston, I want to say 3 times a week, and it's been excellent, well received there. So it's been great. The people that have volunteered to do that, it's been wonderful.
And Jared, I think we just want to be sure everyone's aware we're providing for anyone. So there's been a number of senior citizens who've been taking advantage, and I feel like we're caring for the community, which feels good. So.
Any other questions from the committee?
Dean, I have one. Dr. Hunter, just since labor costs are such a big part of the budget, as you look at the different phases that you're going to go through, is there a chance that we're going to have teaching go on in the summer or at some extended period that would impact to a significant degree what we have to pay teachers?
So I don't think we're looking at anything that would extend the school year per se, which is your biggest, that would be a huge cost. And that would be one of the reasons we wouldn't look to do that. So for the summer, we're looking at options. We have always had a K-5 program that offers for special ed. Certainly we're mandated for eligible kids, and for some regular ed kids who have had data show that there's some need there. We're carrying that forward with the budget that we had right now, and planning both for in-person and remote, depending on where we are and what's going to be available. So right now, we're not expanding that beyond. What we are doing is trying to be sure kids have access to electronic tools all summer. So the middle and high school kids, normally we collect those laptops. We're going to work on a different way to upgrade and clean those and stage that over the summer, so there's not one big, huge time they're down. And I'm going to be talking with the leaders about some academic mandated summer work this summer, which isn't, usually we have some, but this, I think we probably try to build out a broader suite for kids and families to try to keep the skills fresh. So not right now, we're not anticipating huge staff costs. I think we need to start looking at what the staggered piece would look like, because if we have kids really on a split schedule of we've heard a number of various ways people might do this, which has yet to be seen. But if kids are coming in half day and half day, or somehow the school day is getting lengthened to accommodate that, that would be a cost. So we're going to start running all of those scenarios. So we've got all the numbers that would go with it. And then you pick up a bus run, double the bus runs too, to do that. So last time we met with the commissioner, the superintendent's around with him regularly. And certainly we are collaborating both with our school committees and with each other as regional districts of superintendents. Sometimes the ideas we hear floated out are every other week or half day, 10 kids at a time. Good. Those are all the questions. And I think even PPE is part of our discussion now. There's, considerable likelihood kids could be in masks when they come back, and a really broad range of, game-changing pieces for us while we try to teach and be whatever normal is going to be now. So, but kudos to the entire school-based team, because, we've turned this around on a dime to do things we've never done before, and do it fairly effectively. So,
thank you.
Thanks. Good questions.
Any more questions from the FinCom? I have a procedural note. I'm reminded by the moderator that the schedule that we would be on to conduct a town meeting on June 22nd would require us to get a FinCom report into the hands of citizens by June 8th, which means it has to close and go to press by May 22nd and be mailed by June 1st, I believe. Mailed by June 8th. So to get ourselves to a crisp budget with a guideline and a recommendation by May 22nd, if we're going to try to push for that, I'm going to be scheduling several FinCom regular meetings to try to get through that. So strap in. It's gonna be a bit of a quick sleigh ride here. So I don't know if we'll be able to, get where we need to go by May 22nd. I don't know if we're allowed to just not have a FinCom report or issue it at the last minute. Carmen might be able to comment on that. So, but that if we're gonna push for the June 22nd town meeting, we're on the hook to get our ducks in a row and quickly. So just a reminder. I don't see anybody with their hand up or comments from the audience. Are there any citizens who'd like to raise their hand or make a comment on the conversation we're having here with the school committee and the superintendent? Seeing none, I think we can move on to the Article 28, which I think you decided that's just the parking lot, and you just have said you're not going to move 28. Is that correct?
Correct. The school committee voted not to move that.
Okay, so we can skip that one for tonight and move on to Article 29. I think Mr. Lawson is going to talk to that, and that is the Middle School Stabilization Fund, proposing to set aside funds to offset future debt service costs. There he is. You're
muted.
No, he's not muted. I don't know. It
was right there.
No.
I know, but his mic is your volume turned up. You don't seem to be muted. You seem to be on mic, but we can't hear you. Okay. Let's see. We hear nothing. It's unfortunate.
Do sign language.
So just a quick technical, having used Zoom more than I'd like. If you logged in prompting to use some other audio, like your phone, as opposed to the internet audio mic, you probably need to just log off and quickly log back in and elect to use your internet as your audio.
Or Mike, you could call in with your phone and use both your phone and your computer.
Like you could also switch directly without logging in and out by clicking the up arrow next to the mic. And it'll tell you to switch to internet audio.
Oh, what a concept. Great. I was looking for exactly that. I was clicking around looking for exactly that setting.
Hey, while we're waiting, I just want to say to Jared and Dr. Hunter, I just want to say thanks for all this work that you're doing for all the kids, in Concord and beyond. It's a Herculean task that you guys are confronted with, and I just want to tip my hat to you guys. Thank you for all the work.
Thanks, Brian. It's a huge team effort, and thank you.
Yeah,
nobody told me this was on the list this year.
Well, Mike, can we?
Meeting ID followed by pound.
Oh wait, hey, Mike, we have a different.
We can hear you.
We have a different strategy for
Now
you.
we can hear you.
We have a different strategy for you. The little
There
microphone.
you go. How about that? Well, good evening.
There you go. You're better. There you go. You're all set.
Yeah, I did nothing but call you. So I don't know.
There you go. Okay.
Anyway, this is Article 29, the Middle School Stabilization Fund. This article, as you know, came to the Select Board via your committee. Your committee recommended it to the Select Board. And it's an article to transfer the sum of $2 million of free cash to the Middle School Stabilization Fund. So that's the article. The Select Board was happy to affirm your recommendation, and so I guess I'm happy to answer any questions.
As it was our recommendation in the first place, are there any questions from the committee?
Dean, I can just offer that the building committee meetings, we're trying to get to a certain place, and then we're going to talk about where we are. So next week there's a meeting and people might want to tune in. Much the same mindset as what you heard us say in the budgets. We know things are different, and please come be part of that and listen.
The committee is meeting on the 14th, as Lori has indicated, and at that time they'll be at a certain point in their charge, and they'll be considering the project then again. So as Lori said, I would suggest that you, if you're interested, you would tune into that committee meeting on the 14th.
Thank you both for that suggestion. I'd just like to sort of reiterate that it appears that we're going to eventually have a new middle school, and putting money aside in a savings account to that end is still appropriate, even if the schedule may vary or the budget may vary. We're going to have debt service, and there's really no avoiding it at this point. We know that. So I think this is still a valid and appropriate article for us to be considering at this year's town meeting, and we should continue to consider it as such. So,
Dean,
but I think it is in everyone's interest on the finance committee to get yourselves apprised of the progress that's been made so far. I've asked our observer, Peter Fischelis, to write up an observer report in text form, and we'll distribute that to the finance committee, and I can have it posted. I suspect I can have it posted to the finance committee website on the town site, so that we're just apprised of the progress without having to go pour through lots of minutes or go watch a lot of video. It will be important for us to understand that project, and Peter's going to summarize that and distribute it within the next week or so. So that's coming eventually.
Dean, if you're finished with this article, can I make a very quick comment?
Yes.
Since there was a lot of conversation this evening with respect to budgets and the school, I would just remind everybody, if you don't know, the select board will be meeting this Thursday at 4:00. And the main item on our agenda at that meeting is to discuss town finances. So we'll be we'll be talking about town finances from kind of two perspectives. One is just understanding where we are in the current fiscal year. And the second will be to try to understand our capacity to go forward with the 1/12 spending plan that's been authorized by the legislature if we find ourselves necessary or interested in doing that. So for the Finance Committee, it might be something of interest to you. And so I would encourage any of you to like to please attend that meeting at 4 o'clock.
Thanks, Mike.
Sure.
Do you think there'll be any any new data available by that time to discuss in that meeting?
I think Carrie LaFleur is on, and my suspicion is there will be. We were going to talk about this last week, but we decided to postpone it until this coming Thursday because the fourth quarter tax payment deadline was this Friday, and we should have a little bit better handle on the actual amount of revenues that come in. But I see Carrie is there, so perhaps she could comment.
We'll definitely have a lot of new information coming out on Thursday. I'm not sure how much in advance of Thursday's meeting it will be available.
Right.
Mary.
Mary, you're muted.
You're muted.
Okay. Mike, I don't know if you know the answer, but if we do go ahead and have a town meeting on June 22nd, does that prevent us from going to the 1/12 model? So if we go ahead with June 22nd, we have to have a budget.
Sure. We deal with the budget at that
Assuming
time
it gets
meeting.
passed.
You've read the moderator.
Assuming it gets passed. Okay.
Read the moderator's memoranda about town meetings. She would suggest that we would go ahead by identifying urgent articles, which would include the budgets, of course, to try to limit the amount of time we have to be in session and postpone the non-urgent items until sometime later in the fall. But yes, if we had a town meeting in June 22nd or any time before the fiscal year closes on the 30th, that then would be our budget.
If it passed.
If it passed.
Thank you.
D.
Thanks. Lori, do you have a date for a special town meeting with regards to the middle school project, or is that part of what you're going to be talking about on the 14th? Or
yeah, the timeline in general will be part of the discussion. I think anything we were considering is up for discussion at this point because things are all different. So no, we don't know for sure, but anything we were talking about looks different. So I would say the meeting next week will start to lay that out.
Thank you.
We've had one select board discussion, I think, with Lori and others about, along with the town clerk, trying to understand what options we have for a special town meeting in the fall and weighing the various costs versus voter participation and timing. So relatively complicated task.
Well, thank you, everyone. Well, I'm just going to see if there are any citizen participants who'd like to raise their hand, ask questions about any of the proposals from the school. And I have one here. So I'm going to let Matt Johnson have a few words.
Hi, Matt Johnson, 21 Winthrop Street, and talking about Article 29. And it's I've typed my comment, but it's while we need a stabilization fund to pay for any school we build, the pandemic has accelerated the transition to more online learning models. And some of those changes may not be temporary, they could be permanent. Should we take a second look at not just the budget for the school, but also the design principles in light of that? Because it'd be unfortunate to invest in a visionary building for a bygone era.
I mean, I can answer off the top of my head, and what I know 5 weeks into remote learning virtually is that it's shown us what the strengths of that are, and it's shown us the weaknesses. And the weaknesses are the relationships and connections and collaboration between kids and teachers. And for sure, the building, and remember, we're at feasibility, so building design is still at the high level here. We certainly were building with the mindset of collaboration and teams and connections and that being much of our priority. So I don't, if anything, I think we've been reminded that that is incredibly critical. To the other side of your point, some things that were on our list of things to try differently in the next 3 to 5 years, we're starting to do in the last 3 to 5 weeks. So we've made, leap years of progress in certain areas, and we'll reflect on what of those is healthy and productive in that climate of connection and relationship and interaction with each other. So you're right. I think right now I'm actually more confirmed that the building was going in the direction it would and should. But that's also, I think, part of the discussion of the building committee next week is sort of where we're at, what we've learned, what's different, what do we think's coming, how does that fit into design, and then the process itself in this environment and where that plays out. So great question, one we need to keep recircling back to.
Any other comments from the public? I don't see any other hands raised or questions posted. So I will look for a motion to close the hearing.
So moved.
Carl, second.
Second
from D. Ordner, and we're going to have a roll call to get us out of this thing. So Mr. Taylor, I need a vote here to adjourn the meeting.
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds, Mr. Guariello,
Yes.
Ms. Ordner,
yes.
Ms. Hartman,
Yes.
Mr. Rubenstein,
Please.
Mr. Tarpey. Thumbs up for Mr. Tarpey. Ms. Zoll,
Yes.
Mr. Patel,
Yes.
Mr. Hickling.
No.
Was that a no? But you can stay on. What are you, outdoors? What is that? Okay. Mr. Packard.
Bye-bye.
Mr. Fischelis.
Yes.
Mr. Swain. Oh, he's not talking to us. Unmute your mic. All right, I think that's a majority. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
It's been a big success. All right, good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.